And good morning to you all. My name is Jan Daniel. I am a researcher at the Institute of International Relations, Prague, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to the second panel of the conference, which is titled Diplomacy and Preventing the Misuse of Religion. We have three well-qualified panelists to tackle this difficult issue. First, Ismail Hakkı Musa, who is an ambassador and special representative of the OSCE chairman in office to combat intolerance and discrimination against Muslims from Turkiye. Then we have Sarah Wolff, who is a professor in European politics and international relations, and also a director of the Center for European Research at the Queen Mary University of London. And finally, we have Jiří Schneider, who is well known to this building. He's a former first deputy minister of foreign affairs of the Czech Republic, and currently he's a lay moderator at the Evangelical Church of the Czech Brethren. Unfortunately, our fourth panelist, who you will see there on the panel, Professor Gregory Reichberg, was prevented from joining us by some logistical difficulties. This session is titled Diplomacy and Preventing the Misuse of Religion. And I think it's possible to question basically every single word of this title. And we already have had some discussion about that in the previous panels. However, this conference is also supposed to discuss how to build bridges towards peace. And this particular panel is composed of two diplomats and an academic. So we will shift the terms of the debate a little bit, and we will mainly discuss how diplomats can work with religion as a concept, and probably also religion as a lived practice. How can they work with faith-based groups, and what actually this sort of, let's say, relationship or this sort of engagement can mean for building bridges towards peace. Our panelists were specifically asked to think about three guiding questions that relate to this panel. And those are, what common lessons can policymakers derive from their experience to cope with the misuse of religion and potential, let's say, use of violence justified by the misuse of religion? What are the most convenient diplomatic tools to cope with the misuse of religion or to prevent the misuse of religion? And finally, what constructive role can faith-based organizations play in this process? So, in answering these three questions, we will start with the remarks of our speakers. Each of them will have about, let's say, 10 minutes for their initial remarks, and that should give us enough time for the discussion after the opening. Well, now, without further delay, Mr. Ambassador Musa, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dear participants, respectable colleagues and audience. We are invited today to exchange on a very sensitive issue, diplomacy and its links with religious freedom, misuse of religion. You asked a few questions to us, and I tried to prepare a set of answers. I do not know if this will cope your expectations, but anyway, I will try it. I should say that the exercise is a little bit tough. This is, of course, a pleasure and honor to be here with you today. And thank you for inviting me, Mr. Chair. And I would also thank our ambassador, the Turkish ambassador to Prague, former Minister Bausch, for proposing to invite me here. We all know that religion is always at the core of political discourse, although the role we attribute to the religious doctrine differs in time. Hence, religion set the major focus of loyalty for societies and decision makers during the Middle Age. Then came modernity, which envisaged religion's role to be minimal. This was challenged by Auguste Comte, who predicted that religion would serve as a basis for moral judgment. This duality still kept religion at the heart of political debate even today. Cold War fed this dilemma with a Polish Pope on the one side and the Iron Curtain rejecting the belief's role on the other. But there is another development that could be considered as a religion, as an institution, which is reinvigorated. The last 3 decades have introduced us to the rise of this phenomenon. Religion once again becomes a significant factor in politics and international relations. Discussions around believers of monotheistic religions had already gained ground after 90s. On the other hand, revival of the religion component in the Western identity catalyzed the clash of civilization theory in 1993. Clash of civilization theory accommodating Judeo-Christian identity on one side and Muslim on the other laid the groundwork for hostility and polarization. We were also shocked by the 9/11 attacks in 2001, who carried Muslims to the forefront of the debate. What was more alarming for all of us was that the people who committed these attacks resorted to religion to justify themselves. The first example of misuse of the religion, Mr. Chair. And then we will access to another phenomenon that I could describe as diplomacy recalled. These developments led us to remember what diplomacy was for. Diplomacy took floor against misuse of religion, especially after 9/11 attacks. We know and we believe that no religion should be associated with terrorism and deliberate clash. This is dead end. With this understanding, and this is the proposal, Mr. Chair, World Family of Nations came together to form the Allies of Civilizations, Mr. Ambassador referred to before. In 2005, Turkish and Spanish diplomacies led the initiative. They were supported by the UN Secretary General, and today it's a United Nations initiative. Mr. Moratinos is the High Representative, and Turkey and Spain are still co-chair of this platform. Hereby, I deem once again accurate to point Mr. Bağış, our ambassador, who is also a member of the board of the Alliance of Civilization. This is the right description, Mr. Ambassador, I think. A landmark of this initiative is the Istanbul meeting in November 2006. The parties announced that the tension between the West and some quarters in the Islamic world is not religious, but political. This is how diplomacy set a barrier against the misuse of religion. Mr. Chair. And now I would give another example of misuse of religion and the role of diplomacy. We can qualify the diplomacy versus religion-referred conflicts. When it comes to where diplomacy stands in terms of our perception of religion in world affairs, I would like to touch upon this very subject. We observe religion as a dominant factor in inter-ethnic or protracted conflicts. Kashmir and Palestine issues are two examples that come to mind. War in Bosnia and Herzegovina in the 90s is also a case. Therefore, it is important to make the separation here. The problems are about mainly national identities and historic territorial claims. Therefore, they are mainly political and not necessarily and fundamentally religious. These dimensions are overlapping. Reading the matter as a war between believers of different religions stands out as yet another misuse of the term and creates more complications. It plays in the hands of extremists and armed networks of crime. Daesh or ISIS is the most striking example. This murdering and organized crime machine is the outcome of chaos in the Middle East and estrangement of masses. They took advantage of the feeling of marginalization to recruit for their lines. This is another version of the misuse of religion. What happened just after? Thanks to persevered efforts, we have the global coalition against Daesh. Our country also is a member of this initiative. We have managed to stop this scourge and push it back to diminishing in the Middle East. I would just touch on another dimension, which is my responsibilities under the umbrella of OSCE, that I could qualify as diplomacy versus Islamophobia. Related with this concept, I would like to touch the increasingly visible phenomenon of our time, Islamophobia and combat against anti-Muslim hatred. This is one of the major issues where we need diplomacy. I will not delve into the facts and to how Islamophobia erupted, its major manifestations, root causes, or how to find a way out. These are all topics to discuss at a specific panel, and I would be very pleased to be here once again, Mr. Chair. I will rather underline the fact that the entire set of initiatives to combat anti-Muslim discrimination serves to one purpose indeed: preempting misuse of religion by extremists who abuse mischief against the vulnerable. Then I will exemplify how diplomacy works to create, coordinate, and institutionalize efforts all around the world to foil this dangerous trend. For example, we have good practices on the ground generated by diplomacy, mainly. It provides us instruments to correct the grim picture. Efforts by OSCE, the Council of Europe, the OIC, and the United Nations as the engines of a concerted multilateral efforts to raise awareness. The OSCE plays a pioneering role for the international community. The personal representative mechanism, for example. The Council of Europe followed the OSCE with its special representatives. We have several reports, principles, and recommendations adopted by these umbrella organizations. Finally, the UN General Assembly proclaimed, 15 March as International Day to combat Islamophobia. As our chair reminded me, I will try to conclude by referring to a concept which is very important personally for me to that extent. Diplomacy and social contract. This is the solution for us, I think. Then we can include that, induce that a way to obstruct the misuse of religion for subversive purposes is a holistic social contract, which embraces all components under the human rights umbrella. Bringing all stakeholders together around a social contract is what diplomacy can contribute to achieve, and the freedom of religion and belief should be an integral component of this new social contract. By social contract of all parties, I mean a new approach and a new terminology to be incorporated. So, we are very accommodated with this former terminology, tolerance. Who am I to tolerate you? And vice versa. We should change our terminology. The new terminology replaces mutual respect with tolerance. We do not tolerate each other's existence. We respect it. Social contract should evaluate the matter as an integral component of international human rights law. Hence, another requisite which diplomats can achieve or contribute to achieve. Secondly, I am not far from the end. We have to keep away from associating any religion with terrorism or violence. Thirdly, criminalize aggression against any religion, its sacred and flowers, render it sanctionable by law. These precautions will act as confidence-building measures against the misuse of religion. Thank you, Mr. Chair. You can consider these final remarks as my conclusions and as my proposals. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much for providing us with some concrete proposals, and thank you very much for pointing of different instances of misuse of religion, and also with let's say, also pointing to the fragile boundary between the area of religion and area of politics. I'm sure that our next speaker will elaborate on many of these issues as well. Please, Sarah, the floor is yours.
Yes, this works. Okay, good morning all. Hello, everyone. I'm Sarah Wolff. I'm professor at Queen Mary University of London, and I think I'm really pleased to be here because usually you are the people I interview for my research, diplomats. So basically, my research is concerned with how the EU deals with religious engagement, especially EU institutions. I've done research on the European Parliament, European External Action Service, and I think that's the position I take when I speak today. So I'm really interested in understanding how the EU, which initially has no competence in this matter, engage with the religious. Who do they include or not in their dialogue is very important. What dynamics take place. But also, what does it mean about the EU in terms of identity? So how to engage with the religious. Also, what does it mean about the EU, a place where you have so much diversity in terms of relationship between secularisms and religion also internally. So that's where I come from. I'm also an international relations scholar, which is a discipline that is, I think, has had a secular, inherent nature. And where religion has been a blind spot for many years. You spoke about the revival of the religious. There is a debate. Some say, well, the religious has always been there, just that international relations has been conceived as a diplomatic practice, but also as a discipline, as a place where there is not much space for the religious. So that's a little bit the perspective I'm coming from. And I have three main points I want to make today. The first one is really to try to think about the definition of the religious. I think that really came out as the main comment I wanted to make when I read the title of this panel. And what are the challenges for diplomats when they engage with the religious? Second, I will speak more about how the EU institutions have been progressing and developing their own practices, diplomatic practices when it comes to religious engagement, and have improved greatly compared to years ago. And third, I will speak, I think, about your point about faith-based organization and also provide a concrete example. So I think the first point when it comes to the religious is we have to take into account, especially at this time, that we are not in a traditional world order anymore that we used to know. I think this has been raised already, but we have to develop religion and our understanding of the religious in a multiplex world. This is what Professor Amitav Acharya has actually wrote about, that now, we know about the secularization thesis, that secularization does not necessarily lead to modernity, but there are different kinds of modernities. Like you go to a multiplex cinema and you have a lot of choice nowadays, right? So how does EU, especially from my perspective, the EU diplomats that I engage with, how could they engage with this? And I think it's about the capacity to engage in the multi-log and to be able to listen to a plurality of histories and values, and to develop an expertise, a diplomatic expertise that help to triangulate diverse knowledge, resources, and skills to respond to these challenges of the multiplex world. So this has also to do a lot with, I think, taking into account in diplomatic practice, global ethics, and caring about the others. We spoke about respect and tolerance, but I think it goes even beyond. And this also is very useful for how then you deal with this pre-reverse at home, not only in diplomacy, but also at home in diverse societies. So I think it's a little bit about unlearning what is religion. Do we all have the same understanding of what religion is? I think, and we have heard a lot, especially in recent years, that diplomats should gain religious literacy. Yeah, because initially when you speak to diplomats, religion is not necessarily on their radar. They've not been trained to deal necessarily with the religious as a factor of international relations. So how do we train? And how do we unlearn religion in the sense that religion is not a fixed category? It's something that is evolving, that is dynamic, that is also part not only of, state and state-based policies and interfaith dialogue, but it goes beyond, because it's also about the everyday. And I think that's the challenge of the diplomat, to engage with what it means, what does the religious means in everyday life. And I think it has to do with understanding the local context. When you enter a crisis, a diplomatic crisis, or you want to solve a diplomatic conflict, it's about understanding what are the different dynamics at hand in the religious world, but also with an intersectional approach. So I think really equipping diplomats to be able to deal with the religious in an intersectional way, where they can also take into account the impact it may have sorry, on class, on race, on gender, is really important. And I think it's part of a bigger, it might sound quite theoretical and difficult, but I think it's a bigger endeavor to unlearn what is the religious as well, and to reconstruct a little bit. My second point is really to mention a little bit the progress that have been made by EU institutions when it comes to strengthening training or diplomatic training and religious engagement. I think compared to a couple of years ago, the EU institutions, External Action Service, European Parliament have done great progress, European Commission as well. I think initially the EU was not equipped to deal with the religious. You might, and the person who actually decided to instigate a dialogue with religious leaders, but also non-confessional organizations and churches, was Jacques Delors. At the time, he was president of the European Commission, and he said, well, actually, we need a soul for Europe. So that's a very peculiar, enterprise within the world of EU. But it actually ended up being gaining a legal base with Article 17 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, where you have this high-level dialogue which takes place every year. In terms of diplomacy, I think a lot has happened since 2013. The EU has adopted CFSP guidelines to deal with freedom of religion or belief. There has been also a special envoy that has been nominated, and I think, there is, I think the recent one has been just appointed, Frans van Del, to promote freedom of religion or belief outside the EU. The EU also works with like-minded communities and is quite involved in a transatlantic network called the TPRND, which is about diplomacy and religion, which also provides a lot of expertise and knowledge. So I think, and one big development is that actually there is also religious training for EU diplomats. This didn't exist before, so I think that's also very interesting, and as a scholar, I'm of course interested in understanding what kind of knowledge is then being produced by these institutions when it comes to the religion, and what does it tell us about our engagement with the rest of the world, but also about ourselves, yeah, in terms of identity. And I think, I don't know how I'm doing with time, but I think I'm going down to my third point, if that pleases the chair, which is also the role of faith-based organizations. I think within, again, the context I know best, which is the European Union, I think there is a lot of access of this faith-based organization to humanitarian aid, but also to development aid. They are recipients of EU funds, and what is changing, I think, is next to being recipients, they are also more and more included in consultations by EU institutions, especially if you look, for instance, at climate change. I think in terms of COP summits, there has been a lot of consultations of these organizations, and the EU leaders realize that also faith-based organizations or religious leaders have quite an important or play an important strategic messaging or framing, role when it comes to climate change as well in different local communities. So I think this helps also the EU to strengthen its global leadership and is a welcome development. I'm not saying that everything, is perfect, but I'm just highlighting a few developments which I think have or demonstrate quite some progress. One final development I wanted to mention, I think, is the Global Exchange on Religion in Society, which was launched in 2019 and I think is still going on. It's a project that is supported by the Foreign Policy Instrument at the European External Action Service. And it's a quite interesting experiment because it's a network of civil society actors that are faith-based but also secular, that actually try to reflect or try to feed into the EU foreign policy system. So this has, you can go, it's on their website. I think there was an experiment initially led by the Lokai Foundation that has also taken part in this dialogue here in Prague. And I think it's really exactly what I was saying at the beginning, the capacity to really go intersectional, to go local, to go about the everyday meaning of the religion, and to have this intersectional capacity to consult networks and to rely on transnational networks of actors that include faith-based actors, but also beyond, to make sure that religion is just not something that we tick as a checkbox. Yes, we're doing religious engagement, but it goes beyond and it has an intersectional approach. So I think this is also a very positive development. And again, yeah, my conclusion is, I think, yeah, to fight the misuse of religion, I think an everyday and pluriversal approach to it is very much essential. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for providing us with some specific examples. I'm very happy to say that some of the organizations that you mentioned actually took part in this conference in the previous years. So there is actually some expertise being built, hopefully also here in Prague on these issues. But now, without further ado, I would like to ask Mr. Jiří Schneider as our third speaker.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I was called to this panel, so to say, last minute. So, but I'm glad and thankful to the organizers that invited me. I wear two hats, basically. One is I'm a former diplomat. I spent in this circles and in this house, particular house, part of my life. But I'm currently representative of the Evangelical Church in this country, which is a very, very minority church. I would like to correct what Turkish ambassador said, that this country is not full of atheists, but it's definitely a minority as for the church membership. And my church is really, really tiny church. I will come back to my church in the end of my presentation, because I consider my church as a faith-based organization, so it fits into the topic. Now, this country has been 600 years ago. It was torn by religious war, and it was war which was driven by religious arguments. And at that time, if you would ask a diplomat in 15th century Europe if religion is a factor, he will definitely say it is a factor. The problem is that religion has been, I would say, a blind spot in the education of diplomats for many years, as Professor Wolff has said. Nobody has, you know, everybody believes, has to believe that soccer, football, is a factor in international relations. Sorry to say, after yesterday's, you know, riots after the match, nobody has, you know, difficulty with that. But if you ask, you know, and what about religion? Some people say, okay, wait a minute, this is out of it. So literacy for diplomats, I think it's absolutely crucial. And I'm happy that finally Robert Řehák and others are preparing some kind of course for Czech diplomats to be literate in religion. Of course, diplomats have been taught to find maximum about the culture of the country they are going to be. And religion was a part of the culture. But I think it's not a proper dealing with religion. It has to be a deeper understanding, because religion is important, or against religious attitude is important as well. Now, preventing misuse. Who is misusing religion? First of all, I have some troubles with the word use of religion, but okay, let's use this word for the sake of discussion, use and misuse. States are misusing religion. This is a matter of fact. States are using religion inside and outside as a justification of their interests, whatever it means. It means also diplomats of these states are sometimes misusing religion. They're using faith-based organizations, churches, to support their case. So let's be frank, this is sometimes very cynical use of religion. Maybe in a discussion we can come to examples. But of course, religion is misused also by non-state actors. And that has been mentioned. The justification of the terrorist acts, 9/11 is a, I would say, example which has waken up all those who said religion is absolutely irrelevant, at least as a justification of these acts. Now, as for what's the core reason why we have to be interested in religion or in rejecting religion? Because it's a very important element which creates a sense of belonging. And a sense of belonging to community is a very important element. It could lead to group egoism also. It could lead to distinction between us and them. And it's a dangerous consequence, because distinction between us and them is not bad, unless we deal them with the same respect as us. But that's a very dangerous risk in religious motivations. What are the tools of preventing this? I see no other rules than a rule of law. It means rule of law in the places where there is a rule of law. And we don't have a rule of law across the globe. That creates a problem. Because if you have a rule of law, you can address the question of incitement, offensive behavior based on religion. This can be solved by rule of law if you have a proper, just rule of law. Of course, the misuse of religion is prevented if there is a free exercise of religion. If religion is not suppressed. If it's suppressed, then it's very difficult to... So maybe free exercise of religion is, in terminology of our conference, the use of religion, the proper use of religion. Now, the recipe, literacy about religion, openness about failures, abuse of authority, manipulative behavior of our own religion, of our own group. This is a precondition. If we are open about our own failures, it cannot be misused in a discourse. And the role in preventing misuse of religion have leaders as well as local communities. In this, let me turn to my double hat, I would like to mention, as an example of a small effort, as I said, Evangelical Church is a minority church in this country. It doesn't have any influence. But we know that creative minorities, I consider Czech Evangelical Church as a creative minority, can have influence more largely. Our synod has passed a statement on relations not to Islam, but to Muslims. There are copies of the translation of this document. And I would like to acknowledge Mikuláš Vymětal, our pastor for minorities and other religions, interreligious dialogue, who was helpful in making this happen. But it was a lot of other people, theologians, pastors, lay people in our synod who are part of the synod, who agreed with this. I just want to underline that the point was not to define the relations to the religion, but to define a relation which to people, to concrete people. And a part of that was encouragement of our local congregations to be in contact and dialogue with concrete neighbors, Muslims, and to be open in that dialogue. To oppose prejudices, because personal encounter is the best recipe to avoid prejudices, as we know. To overcome ignorance, to find out more. And to oppose the populist efforts who are really stirring the fear from the other, from the unknown. And to appeal to meet with these people in a peaceful way. I just mentioned this because I think it's important that this statement acknowledges all the statements by the religious leaders. There have been some mentioned. The Pope made a statement, and there are several statements of the religious leaders around the world. But what is important is that these statements should be translated into local communities, faith-based organizations, and their behavior to their partners. And that would be my point. This is a people-to-people diplomacy, as diplomats call it. It's very important, the social encounter, as Ambassador has mentioned. I think the key for the dialogue is that concrete people meet across the division of their beliefs, faith, and races. And this is the way how to overcome prejudices. Of course, we recognize the differences. The statement was not about concealing that we have some differences on some issues. It was a question of the freedom of Muslims in Europe, but also the freedom of exercise of Christian in Islam countries. That's an important issue for us, and we are not on equal terms with that. There is a question of equality of men and women. This is not also something where we can sign a 100% agreement on everything. But it did not prevent us from making this statement and making it public as an appeal to not only the members of the church, but also members of the public. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you very much. It is definitely interesting to hear from someone who was standing, let's say, on both sides of diplomatic and layperson divide. And thank you very much also for providing us with some concrete examples of how to actually take diplomacy and sort of some methods of building tolerance. So with some concrete examples how to take these out from this hall and into the streets, actually. There was another thing that I really like about your intervention or about your remarks, and that was the way how you highlighted the need for being open to criticism, and actually being open to criticism as a way of maybe building resilience, but also showing confidence by allowing oneself to be criticized. Also, this is actually a perfect bridge to the last part of our panel, which is questions and answers. So we heard here kind of invitation for criticism. So please, I hope that you will take that up and ask some question to our panelists or to the panel as such. So please, are there any questions at this point? Please identify yourself first and please be brief. I see a gentleman there with the tie. Yes.
My name is Philip McDonough. I'm a former Irish ambassador, and last year our Prime Minister launched a centre that I'm developing in the university on religion and diplomacy. So I'd like to address especially Ambassador Musa, because one of my postings was as ambassador to the OSCE, and with friends I've written quite a lot about the OSCE. And I was very taken by what you said, Ambassador, that tolerance is not enough. You know, we have to move on to respect and community. And I wonder whether the personal representatives, you and Professor Pollack and Rabbi Baker, could become the nucleus of something new in that area, moving from the issue of discrimination to the area of positive peace building. And I would mention that there are a number of people in the room here who brought together a meeting here in Prague some weeks ago at the OSCE Documentation Center. Ambassador Irena Krasnica is here, for example, who was our host. And we were discussing world food systems security. So we live in a world, as we know, where quite apart from climate change, you know, half the countries in the world are in very serious trouble over prices and so on. So we were looking at that issue as a kind of door into this wider question of how we build peace in the world today. So that would be my question. And I would say you could translate the same approach into the EU, and I wonder about the European Parliament, for example, which I don't think came up so much in what Sarah was saying, but there could be something done there as well. But my main focus would be on the OSCE, and I would finally say that I think that ODIHR would be very supportive of what I'm saying. Friends in ODIHR have been part of the work that we've been doing.
Thank you very much. I think we'll collect more questions and then let the panel answer. I saw some other raised hands. Yes, please, right there and then.
Does it work? Yes.
I think I can speak quite loud, if you don't mind. My name is Sylvia Wittmanova. I am the Liberal and Reform Community Beit Simcha. Thank you, now it works, so I don't have to yell. And I have a question. In Judaism, we learn about Tikkun Olam. Tikkun Olam is to make the world better. I think that such conference can contribute in making the world a bit better in writing a document that would be supporting the Muslims, the Christians, all variations of Christians, the Jews in Ukraine, because all these people are bombed. If they are Muslims, Christians, Jews, agnostics, or non-religious. So I personally think that we should support, we should write this, we should make a conclusion here and write a document that would be sent to several authorities, because what takes us together, what brings us together, it's sometimes enemy, and we all have an enemy that is enemy of all of us. So here we can be very friendly to each other, we can be very kind to each other, we can support each other, but now we have to support people of all religions living in a country that is bombed by post-communist red evil. Thank you.
Thank you. And there was a last question. If I'm not mistaken, yes, please.
So I'll try this with the mic. Hello. My name is Mirela Kreda, and I am working as a mediator, as a conflict resolution professional, and also in peace building. I just returned from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where I was engaging as well in peace building and was giving a training for a week on the topic of how to manage strong emotions. And I want to mention one topic because I feel this is very often neglected, it's very often forgotten, but it's extremely, extremely relevant when it comes to religion and interfaith dialogue. And you mentioned a lot of know yourself, you mentioned a lot of tolerance and respect, but there's one, and religious literacy and training for diplomats, but there's one part which is emotional intelligence. Because religion is for many people, it's a very emotional topic. It's a topic of identity. It's a topic of fear. You were talking about fear, of hope. And that's why I'm mentioning just coming back from the DRC, because this is one of the countries that has been torn by war, many people in despair, people eventually finding in a religion a way that helps them live with all the struggles, that helps them make it through the day, and that helps them, as you said, to build a community. And also there, in the meantime, there is many groupings of different churches, and then that's what you said, this intergroup egoism, which also happens. But I want to put that here on the table also, not as a criticism, but just something to remember and something to consider. If you want to overcome prejudices, if you want to see the differences, but also the similarities, we all have this humanity in us, we all have fears, we all have hope, and this is the purpose, and if you want to overcome the ignorance, you have to consider emotional intelligence as maybe also, when you were speaking about what could be done as a tool to maybe also train diplomats, train people, help other people from other religions understand the other. So know yourself, but also know and understand the other in all their entirety of being a human person, being a human, being emotional, being driven by many emotions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So we have three, let's say, broad questions, and I will give our panelists about 2-3 minutes to answer at least one of them. You can definitely pick and choose. And we will go in the same order as we did with the panel. So I will ask Mr. Ambassador to start, and then we will move to Professor Wolff, and then to Mr. Schneider. Mr. Ambassador.
It's okay. Yes, it works. Thank you. Once upon a time, I was a student in France, and there was a famous politician, Mr. Ambassador. His name was Georges Marchais at the beginning of 80s. One day on the French television, he was with a few journalists. They asked to him a critical question. Mr. Secretary General, tell us a little bit about your relationship with the Russian Communist Party. And he gave an answer which was not the answer that the journalist were expecting. This was the case. And Mr. Marché, he said in French, "Que voulez-vous? Vous êtes venu avec vos questions, je suis venu avec mes réponses." This was the case. Maybe you are not satisfied 100%, but I am working with the OSCE since the 20th July of this year. And we are working with Rabbi Baker, a wonderful man, and Regina Pollack. Respectively, the first one is on anti-Semitism, and Regina Pollack for the rest. So, of course, the issues are overlapping, and the discrimination, Mr. Ambassador, is on the agenda for me, for Baker, Rabbi Baker, for Regina Pollack. But what I find out at the end of this this period of half a year, these institutions are very important. They contribute to push forward the common agenda in Strasbourg with ECCB, within the scope of Council of Europe, in Vienna, OSCE, in New York, United Nations, etc., etc. But what we adopt, what they adopt, these are recommendations. They adopt a set of recommendations in Vienna, as this was the case in 2020. For example, OSCE Ministerial Council adopted a wonderful document which sets out 10 important measures to combat Islamophobia. And if the respective governments put into force what they decided in Vienna, the 80%, 80% of the problems when it comes to Islamophobia will be removed of our agenda. Problem is that it's easy to adopt regulations or recommendations because they are not binding in several capitals, but forget about it when we are in our respective countries. This is the problem. I tried to raise, according to me, humbly, an important aspect. When you are in France, when you are in Germany, when you are in Netherlands, when you are in Belgium, especially with the increasing presence of minority peoples, migrants, we are witnessing an important rise on discrimination, special discrimination against Muslim populations, but we also witness another important phenomenon, the public discourse. This is a main issue. I am, as a career diplomat since almost 35 years, this is what I believe today. It's impossible to push forward this agenda without having governments on board. You can do whatever you want. We had in France, for example, a lady called Marine Le Pen, qui a initié quand même dans le discours public what we can consider as a discrimination against a given portion of the population, and the rest. This gained with the. I have to conclude anyway. Thank you. This is the problem, unfortunately. If we can manage to have governments on board, we can have, we can go forward, have some solutions easily. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah?
Yes, it's working. Thank you. Yes, no, I think just to comment on what you said, and then I'll pick your question about emotional intelligence, I think, which was very pertinent. But just to say that, yeah, Marine Le Pen doesn't always manage, you know, to instrumentalize, and I think what happened.
She was not alone, but
what happened
limited myself to.
At least if we go back to football and yesterday, I mean, it was quite interesting to see, you know, how many French, you know, citizens actually felt. Of course, they might have been disappointed, but were actually also very happy that France won, and there has been a really, I think, a feeling of, you know, we are in this together, which was really nice as well yesterday to see. So she did extreme right, at least yesterday, didn't manage to win the argument. But on emotional intelligence, I think it's very important from an academic perspective. Actually, studying the role of emotions in international relations is also very recent. But I think understanding how anger, shame, humiliation, fear also construct international relations, I think, is essential. But I think we need more means, whether it's for diplomats or for peace builders or for academics like us. I think it has to do with psychology. So we need to involve psychologists as well in, you know, mediation and so on. And again, I think it builds into this intersectionality that I mentioned. And if you want to have, you know, I think diplomats, you all work with foresight as well. I think it's really somewhere where there is a lot of prospect, and it's about, I think also understanding that the world is relational and socially constructed. So I completely agree, and I think if more diplomatic funding, training, expertise could be put in these kind of initiatives, I think it's for the best. So I think behind these, you know, conferences, I think it's also about reporting with best practices and implementing programs that help that.
Thank you very much. And Jiří Schneider?
Yes, coming back to areas where blood is shed, Ukraine, Congo, what can we do? Of course, we can express our solidarity with those who suffer, but also we should express our discontent that on the side of killers, sometimes religion is instrumentalized. And I think we should be vocal about that. There's a lot of discontent about how the Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate behaves in this. We should say it loud and clear that this is a misuse of religion to support killing by this. And so I'm not saying that the solidarity with the victims is not needed. I'm saying that at the same time, the other side of the coin is that we should reject the incitement which sparks the killing. It has to be said that this is wrong. I remember. It should be acknowledged that identity, emotions play a big role. By the way, the hashtag from yesterday is religion of riots. Yeah, it didn't have anything with the religion, but we call it religion of riots. I remember someone was telling me, you know, if you remove all the holy sites from the international relations, then probably we could solve the problem. But it cannot be done. The holy sites cannot be undone. We have them, so we have to. We have people who have their motivations by something which some agnostics and secular people have difficulties to embrace. but they should recognize that this is a matter of fact and has to be dealt with emotional intelligence.
Thank you very much. That was a nice bridge between different issues that we discussed here. I'm sorry we are not ending on a more positive note, but I'm afraid that's the world that we are living in nowadays. But since the lunch is awaiting us, I will therefore conclude the panel, and I would like to thank you to all our panelists and also to all our audience for great questions. Thank you very much.